Many of you may remember in the early days of Genshin, there was a long-running issue with healers having very little practical incentive to be used in combat. When accounting for the many advantages that shields had to offer along with the ability to sustain your party in the overworld via statues of the 7 and consumables, it wasn't until version 3 and then later 4 when healers reached a position of dominance. A similar occurrence is taking place in Honkai Star Rail right now, although for different reasons. Among the 7 paths in the game, there are 2 that serve as a means of defense. Preservation consists of units who protect the team via conventional durability, damage reduction shields, cover tanking, and the like, while abundance units are the restorative side of things, offering regeneration, debuff cleansing, and for some, even the ability to restore fallen allies. While conceptually the 2 paths have received an equal distribution of labor, there seems to be a noticeably higher demand for preventing catastrophic outcomes from happening in the first place rather than attempting to salvage a situation after it's already deteriorated. Today we'll be discussing whether or not healers are being pushed down by tanks and what can be done to equalize the market share of both defensive roles. With Honkai Star Rail's central metagame being firmly established now and players having access to a wide variety of units and team compositions, it's easier to ascertain the relative value of each unit, as in how well they perform when being compared with alternatives. Having made a video on Nihility's rise to prominence in the offensive department following the release of Aventurine, with Aventurine scheduled to arrive next week, it's time we discuss the defensive department and how things are shaped to look in the foreseeable future. Throughout version 1, Star Rail's 2 defensive paths were effectively condensed into an umbrella category, Sustain. Anyone whose primary function is to protect their team, whatever form that takes, is designated as a sustain unit. With there being only so many ways to design a sustain unit, especially in a turn-based RPG with as limited of a combat structure as Star Rail, the developers saw fit to expand on the offensive and buffing category more thoroughly. Nothing wrong with that, mind you. That left most players with a handful of options to choose from when it came to the sustain department, and for the most part you could reliably clear everything in the early game with just about anyone. Whether you had Natasha, Bailu, Gepard, March, Lynx, Luocha, it was pick your poison. With Luocha being the first dedicated sustain unit released and rather early on, his seamless usability, auto-battle-friendly gameplay, and SP efficiency made him highly sought after for most of early version 1, as he was far and away the best sustain unit during the time he came out, although you'd be hard-pressed to say he had any competition. Shortly after came Fuxuan, who focused on cover tanking as opposed to Gepard's traditional shielding. Fuxuan and Luocha were the benchmark for sustain units basically up until version 2, one taking the first side of MLC and the other taking the second. There wasn't much of a distinction between the two for quite a while since, like I said, the two were interchangeable. It didn't matter whether you had healing or shielding, you just needed to have one of them. Over time though, the need for healing diminished while the need for tanking began to grow, and as players progressed towards the endgame optimizing their units and clear speeds, 2 things occurred that further opened the gap between the 2 sustain roles. The primary difference between shields and heals is that one is preventative sustain, ensuring the party suffers little to no adverse consequences from attacks brought on by the enemy. On the flip side, the other is remedial sustain, tending to the party after damage has been dealt. While they ultimately share the same end goal, maintaining stability for their party, the way they go about it drastically skews the value of each. And historically, as they say, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Preservation units like Gepard, Fuxuan, and Aventurine offer protection by superimposing what is effectively additional health for their team, that is what a shield is. Gepard and Aventurine grant shields for the entire party, making it so that any damage received would have to first get through said shield before the user sustains any loss of health. It's as if you temporarily increased the max health of each of your units to the tune of whatever the shield amount was. Fuxuan doesn't provide a shield in the traditional sense, as instead she redirects a portion of all damage taken by her units to her. In other words, she is the shield, bolstering her team's max health all the same just with her own health bar in place of an actual shield. Inconveniently, that means Fuxuan can't make use of preservation blessings that require a shield, but if she did, that would just be excessive. Therein lies the critical distinction between healing and shielding. Shields do not care about how much health the targets have, as they simply layer an additional value on top. A 10,000 HP shield is a 10,000 HP shield, no matter if the bearer has 8,000 health or 2,000. For all intents and purposes, it can be interpreted as increasing each of your party members' max health by 10,000. Healing, on the other hand, is hard capped to the max health of the units in question. For example, a 10,000 HP recovery will only restore 2,000 if the target's max health is 2,000, causing the remaining healing to be lost. What this means is that your party's survival hinges not on the healer's ability to recover, but on the rest of your party's ability to withstand incoming fire on their own first. Whereas for shielders, the party's survival is first and foremost dependent on the shielder's protective faculty. Simply put, healers are kneecapped by their party's own resistance to damage, more often than not constraining their maximum potential. The funny thing is, E2 Luocha gives a small shield to units with 50% or more HP upon receiving his skill, which is to allow him to essentially turn that excess healing into bonus health temporarily. For most of the mid to late game, this wasn't that relevant, as it would be exceedingly rare for enemies to dish out so much damage in a single instance that your party would be knocked out before your healer could take their turn. and with both Luocha and Huohuo having passive recovery, the former granting on-hit sustain for his attackers and the latter providing turn-by-turn healing, they could top off their party even outside of their own turn. However, Starl has been advancing in power scaling faster than most people are comfortable with, not just in the strength of our own units, but the strength of enemies. In addition to the later stages of Memory of Chaos growing more and more difficult, Swarm Disaster and Golden Gears pushes things to an even greater extent, with enemies at higher difficulties taking several turns to clear depending on what blessings and curios you have, and likewise dealing huge amounts of damage, more than enough to wipe out your entire party several times over. Though Starl's healers have more than enough juice to recover all that damage, it all depends on if the team is even alive for them to do so. Adding even more pressure is that there's that one enemy whose name is escaping me at the moment who can apply that curse on you that halves your maximum HP, making healing even less effective in those circumstances unless you dispel it. Tanks on the other hand can ignore that completely, as that doesn't impede their shielding or cover in any way, unless of course Fushuan herself loses half her max health, then you might have to sweat a bit. The current problem with healing is that it's hard capped based on the health of your team, whereas shielding is not bound by any cap due to being layered on top of your team or existing as its own medium. Even if we get stronger healers who can restore more health in the future, the fact remains that your damage dealers and most of your supports are not prioritizing health in the slightest. Realistically, you can expect them to hang around 25 to 3500 health unless your name is Blade, so at a certain point, excess healing becomes superfluous. If we go by raw defense, Aventurine, Fushuan, and by extension future shielders will always be more effective at protecting their team than healers, since the only thing they have to care about is, ironically, themselves. Starl is becoming more burst-oriented. You either destroy the enemy or they destroy you. In fairness, a dynamic of heals being capped at the target's max health and shields having no cap is present everywhere, not just Starl. What balances the two out is that while shields are definitely more effective against immediate threat, they're ultimately temporary, expiring shortly after being cast, whereas the effects of healing remain perpetually. It's not like they lose the health they recovered after a certain point. On paper, healing should be seen as more valuable since they can maintain the party indefinitely. Take your part, his shields are so massive you can basically face tank everything in the game and still have shielding left over, but any damage that does break through his defenses will remain permanently, eventually forcing his team to retreat to a space anchor or find some way to heal them. Luocha, on the other hand, can allow you to auto-battle your way through millions of runs without you ever needing to stop and recover. That should be the dynamic balancing the effectiveness of healing and shielding. Here's the problem. Shields in Starl last a comparatively long time, enough to where the short duration clause is basically inapplicable. Fushuan's cover lasts for 3 of her turns, 3 turn cycles. That's an extremely long time if you think about it. Japard's shield is also 3 turns. By that point, you can more than likely maintain your shield up continuously. Aventurine's old playstyle is continuous shielding. It would be one thing if shields lasted for actions instead of turns, forcing players to calculate when they can get the most benefit out of shielding, but with an average duration of 3 turns, when it's available you have no reason not to use it. That sums up problem 1 with healing right now. Shielders get to preemptively save you from damage. Healers have to wait for you to take damage before they can heal you, but if you take too much damage and die, there's nothing they can do about it. So once again, if we go by survivability, shields are infinitely more secure than heals, especially in the endgame where it's less about long-term endurance and more about not getting one-shotted. I'm well aware that Bailu's talent can allow her to bypass death once, and the same goes for E2 Huohuo, she can stop death twice. But there's always a chance that multiple party members can get nuked at the same time, reinforcing my point that it's better to prevent something from happening in the first place than to have an insurance for it. I think the closest thing a healer has to burst resistance would be Bailu's invigoration effect, giving 10% damage mitigation and auto-healing party members whenever they get hit. Usually the killer move of most bosses comes in the form of several hits, which may be just enough for her to protect her team. But that included safety measures compromised by the fact that Bailu suffers from a mountain of other problems. In Swarm Disaster and Golden Gears, as you progress through the higher difficulties, success or failure comes down to whether you can acquire the right combination of blessings and curios to either A, one-shot the final boss before they get a chance to do the same to you, or B, have enough defense to where if and when the boss unleashes their killer move, your party can withstand it. Unless you're extremely confident you have the right blessings to literally one-shot the boss, or you're going for a cheese strategy, this heavily favors tanks who can offer the necessary protection for your team along with the supplementary blessings you have, such as the one that allows each unit to survive death once per battle, or blessings that give bonus defense or damage mitigation. Very similarly to Spiral Abyss, Memory of Chaos is becoming more and more speedrun oriented, to the point where some players omit bringing a sustain unit altogether in favor of zero cycle clearing, at which point neither healing nor shielding is relevant. The other way healers can stand out against their shielding competition is to offer more than just that, which is the second main problem healers face. Traditionally, the assisting element that accompanies healing is cleansing. Huohuo, Luocha, Natasha, Lynx, and Gallagher can remove 1 or more debuffs from whoever they're healing, allowing you to get rid of undesirable status effects like damage over time, frozen, imprisonment, what have you. This is a valuable asset to have, of course, but it's not exactly exclusive to just healers. Though Fushuan doesn't have an explicit cleanse in her kit, her A6 trace grants a debuff spell shield to her party members once per skill cast, preventing them from receiving any crowd control effects during the current action. This is essentially her version of a cleanse. While Aventurine shield is active, all affected allies have 50% bonus effect rest, giving them the chance to avoid being debuffed altogether. Non-sustain units can also cleanse too, such as Bronya's skill, automatically dispelling one negative status effect on a target of choice. To be fair, Huohuo's passive cleanse is still more consistent than any of those, but as I said before, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. You don't have to scramble to remove debuffs from your party if they were never debuffed in the first place. The other way they can stand out is if they offer more supportive benefits, notably offensive support, which happens to be why Huohuo's market share has matured significantly while Luocha's has declined. Luocha's healing is more accessible and cost-effective, but his problem stems from there being a complete lack of anything else. He offers no buffs or utility of any kind unless you aim for his Eidolons, and even then, E1's barely anything to write home about, so if you're trying to make him an offensive buffer, it's either E6 or bust. Huohuo, on the other hand, does have utility in her base kit. Her ultimate supplies a respectable 40% attack to her entire team and charges their energy by 20%, making her one of the best supports to bring for fast clears. These days, Huohuo is prized more for that offensive buffing capability than her actual purpose of being a healer, particularly when unlocking her E1, granting 12% bonus speed to her entire party, indispensable for min-maxing rotations. All the same, tanks have the potential to bring offensive utility as well, and they already do. Fushuan affords 12% bonus crit while her matrix is active, along with 30% bonus crit damage on E1. When casting his ultimate, Aventurine grants 15% bonus crit damage for his entire party when they attack the debuffed enemy, so it's not like tanks are disqualified from buffing their team either. Given all this information, it's safe to say that in terms of late game and end game, tanking is definitively better than healing just by comparing the two defensive measures. That's not to say all tanks are better than all healers, you have to compare the scope of their entire kits. Fushuan and Aventurine are likely going to be the two best sustainers in the game for a very long time, just by the nature of shielding possessing an inherent advantage over healing. At this point, people consider Huohuo more for her buffing capability than healing. For there to be a dedicated healer that can compete with tanks, they would have to have a mechanic that enables them to overheal, such as converting excess healing into bonus max health, effectively enabling them to do the same job as tanks, or they would have to have a main purpose other than healing, which is the more likely outcome, I think. Healing and cleansing at this point are afterthoughts. Henceforth, every healer worth their salt should have cleansing and passive regen of some sort if they want to stand even a chance. What matters more is what else they do besides healing. Huohuo is a battery healer courtesy of her ultimate, so that leaves us with perhaps a debuff healer, someone who can heal while reducing enemy defense, maybe someone who can heal while implanting an elemental vulnerability in the same way Silverwolf does. You could have a healer who increases follow-up attack damage, ultimate damage, damage over time even. Gallagher is a proof of concept in this department with his break damage and attack reduction. Alternatively, if they're dead set on making a fully sustain-oriented healer, they need to add things to protect against burst damage. A way they can pull this off is by making a healer with a skill or ultimate that gives damage reduction for their team, or perhaps even a barrier. A healer whose ultimate fully restores the entire party then grants them a barrier to fully negate the next instance of damage they take. Although if you think about it, that only further proves the point that prevention is always better than remediation. Granted, it's not something that demands immediate attention. Units like Luocha, Bailu, Lynx and such are still valuable assets to have. While there is a clear bias in favor of tanks and burst protection, that's mostly endemic to endgame, wherein most of the time it's all about speedrunning, cheesing, or one-shotting anyway. I just thought it would be something interesting to talk about. Genshin faced a similar issue with shields overtaking healing for quite some time. It wasn't until Sumeru and Fontaine when they finally made healing stand out in their own respect. Hopefully they'll figure a way to equalize the value of healing and shielding in StarWorld too. What do you guys think about this? Do you believe this will exacerbate over time, or is this not as big of a problem as I make it out to be? You're welcome to share in the comments. For now, if you enjoyed the video, it would be great if you could leave a like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow my Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other StarWorld discussion videos if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.